A somber ceremony. The president travels to Texas to remember the victims of Fort Hood. We'll take you there tonight. Missing in the mountains, the frantic search in freezing conditions to find a man and his son before time runs out. Our Saints for Today series continues with the story of a man who once protected John Paul II. And a royal occasion. We'll check in on little Prince George as he met with other babies and their parents. Those stories and much more just ahead on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, April 9th, 2014. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Brian Patrick. We begin looking at news now, and this evening, President Obama remembers the victims of a deadly shooting at Fort Hood, Texas. Last week, a soldier shot and killed 3 people and wounded 16 and others at military post in Texas before taking his own life. The president is once again comforting the nation in the wake of this tragedy. Our Jason Calvi is at the White House this evening with more. Jason?
Brian, the president and the first lady left the White House today to visit with victims' families and those who were injured. During the memorial service, the president called to mind personal details of those who died.
As we've heard, when the government tried to push his way into that room, Danny held the door shut, saving the lives of others while sacrificing his own.
The president's words at Fort Hood today, followed by a 21-gun salute and taps. This is a role, comforter-in-chief, that the president has filled numerous times in his presidency. We think back at Boston and Newtown, and now twice at Fort Hood. Remember back in 2009, 13 soldiers were killed at this same military installation. Brian, this is part of a 2-day trip for the Obamas. They're going to be going to 2 different Democratic fundraising events tonight, and tomorrow the president will be speaking at a summit for the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act.
All right, thank you, Jason Calvi at the White House, and we'll be joining the president and others in prayer for the victims and their families tonight. Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Military police have detained a Marine after they say he shot and killed another Marine at North Carolina's Camp Lejeune. Officials call this an isolated incident, saying it shouldn't be compared to last week's shooting at Fort Hood. A Pennsylvania school went on high alert before the first bell rang this morning. Police say a student went on a stabbing spree. They tell us the 16-year-old injured at least 20 people just before the start of school today. It was a very frightening situation, but police say quick action helped.
I think it could have been a lot worse if there was an immediate interaction that occurred.
The police officer at the school and an assistant principal were finally able to subdue the teen. Everyone is expected to survive, but the school will be closed for a while as police process the crime scene. Across the world in Ukraine, there's concern about getting gas into that country after Russian President Vladimir Putin suggested the Russian-owned gas company may force Ukraine to pay for gas in advance. The company has already raised prices on natural gas. That's on top of other economic penalties Russia has imposed on Ukraine in the past several weeks. Well, you may have seen the shows where the sheriff runs the troublemakers out of town, but not in real life, right? Well, that's what happened to the Florida pastor arrested last September 11th for trying to burn copies of the Quran in a park. Terry Jones was facing felony charges, but he cut a deal with prosecutors. Part of the deal says he cannot return to the county where this happened for 6 months. The clock is ticking as searchers look for 2 men last seen somewhere in the Colorado Rockies. The search is centered just west of Denver near Mount Evans. Dozens of people are trying to find Damian McManus and his 19-year-old son. People expected them back from their camping trip on Sunday. Now the family's very worried.
Because in a scenario like this, it's tough. It's very tough. We have a lot of faith, but it's very tough knowing the reality of the situation.
Rescue crews aren't sure if the 2 are equipped for the wintry conditions currently in the Rocky Mountains. Well, it is a no-go in the U.S. Senate for a bill to give women equal pay. Senators voted on the bill just 1 day after President Obama took executive action ensuring federal contractors pay men and women equally. Despite its failure to pass today, the bill could get another vote in the Senate. That's because Majority Leader Harry Reid voted against it, even though he supports it. This was a tactical, procedural move, allowing Reid to bring the bill back up for a vote since he voted with the majority today. Infertile couples in Italy can now receive egg and sperm donations. Today, an Italian court got rid of a ban on the donations that was part of a 2004 law to regulate artificial procreation. The law reflects a waning Vatican influence on Italian lawmakers. And Catholics in the Philippines lost a fight today. They wanted the Supreme Court there to get rid of a reproductive health law. An Asian news outlet reports that controversial law was upheld, but the court did strike down parts of that which required private and religious hospitals to give referrals for birth control. Filipino Catholic bishops called that part of the decision a recognition of religious conscience rights. To talk about these stories, we have Mary Hallan-FioRito with us tonight. She's the first woman in the history of the Archdiocese of Chicago to hold the title of Vice Chancellor, now the assistant to Cardinal George. Mary, you've been a pro-life advocate for 20 years.
Yes.
Why is egg and sperm donation so problematic, especially for Catholics?
Well, I think it's not just problematic for Catholics, it's problematic for everybody who values human life and human dignity and the family. Because what it does, when you're saying that we can contribute eggs and contribute sperm, and it doesn't matter where they come from, and if you go and shop for them, you're commoditizing human life. You're making human life a commodity that is bought and sold on the market. And that, from the beginning, ab initio, takes away from the very dignity and respect and value that the Church would place on human life. That we've always said that human beings can't be bought and sold, that they're not commodities, that they have an intrinsic dignity just because they're human. And when we get into the marketing and the selling of human life, it's really leading us down a path that's very frightening.
Yet infertile couples say, this gives them the opportunity to have and raise children.
Well, it's not the only opportunity that infertile couples can have to perhaps achieve a pregnancy. There's all sorts of different ways that the Church would approve of.
Yeah, NAPRO technology
is one that we have, is prevalent here in the United States that can be used. And I think oftentimes infertile couples are so pressured by doctors or by health clinics that would, of course, make money from the more reproductive technological services that they provided, that they're not even told about these other options. They don't even know that they exist. So what we would say was, yes, the Church stands with you in your pain if you're an infertile couple who wants to conceive. And yes, we want you to be able to have your own children, biological if necessary. However, there are some times where that's just not possible physically for a woman to conceive or a man to be able to father a child. And in that case, the Church asks to say, look, children who are adopted, who come into families through adoption, are just as much your children as children who you might have biologically. So I think the Church is very open to seeing other forms of family life, but never ones where human beings become bought and sold, and never ones where you can have deliberate destruction of human life as a result.
Let's turn quickly to the law in the Philippines. The Philippines, predominantly Catholic. Is this an attack on the Catholic Church?
Well, I don't know if it's an attack on the Catholic Church, as it is so much an insertion of non-Catholic values into a Catholic country. So we know that the Philippines in particular has very much been a target of international Planned Parenthood for years in terms of trying to get some of their birth control policies and abortion policies. And, groups like that always like to take down a big Catholic country. They always like to be able to say, okay, we got the Philippines, or, we got Malta, or we got whatever the big Catholic countries are known as in the world. And so for them to be able to have the abortion laws and the contraception laws changed in the Philippines, that's a pretty big scalp to take. So that's what they were looking for. Now, I'm glad that the Supreme Court didn't hand them everything that they wanted. I do think that there is some things that we need to look at in the Philippines in terms of genuine concern for the poor there. But what we have to remember is that the Church's teachings on the poor can never be separated from the Church's teachings on sexual morality. They go hand in hand because one leads into the other. And you see in societies where we've separated or people have turned away from the Catholic Church's teachings on sexual morality, you have more women living in poverty.
And by the way, how is Cardinal George? I was looking forward to seeing him at the canonization.
Oh, well, thank you very much for asking. As some of your viewers may know, Brian, he has been undergoing chemotherapy recently for cancer cells that were found in one of his kidneys, and unfortunately is not going to be able to go to the canonization, which he was very much looking forward to, because Blessed John Paul II made him a cardinal and knew him, and so I know it's a great sadness for him. He's in good spirits, but the doctors have advised that simply because of the risks to his immune system from being around so many crowds, it would be better that he didn't go.
Tell him I will take him with me in spirit and keep him in our prayers.
I will do that, Brian. And thank, please, all of your viewers who are praying for him as well.
Thank you, Mary. We appreciate you being with us.
Thanks.
Well, he's the boy who had the intention of the entire world before he was born. We're talking, of course, about little Prince George. We're getting a look at His Highness playing his play date. Prince William, Duchess Kate, and Prince George all met with other first-time parents and their babies during a trip to New Zealand. This is Prince George's first official tour. And last night back in England, Prince George's great-grandmother welcomed Ireland's president to Windsor Castle. Michael Higgins and Queen Elizabeth began Ireland's first state visit to Britain. They expressed mutual affection and respect and determination to leave national hatreds in the past.
We, the Irish and British, are becoming good and dependable neighbours and better friends.
I can assure you that this first state visit of a President of Ireland to the United Kingdom is a very visible sign of the warmth and maturity of the relationship between our two countries.
Guests processed in and gathered at one massive table. They listened to God Save the Queen, played by live musicians. And the Queen and President Higgins even shared a toast. The visit comes 3 years after the Queen made her own visit to the Republic of Ireland. Before that trip, a British monarch last visited Ireland in 1911. If you're still using Windows XP, you might want to consider upgrading. Windows is about to end support for that operating system. That means no more security updates, and that could leave your computer vulnerable to a virus. Coming up, Pope Francis tackles the gifts of the Holy Spirit at his Wednesday audience, focusing today on wisdom. And Alan Holdren reports from Rome about a trend toward recognizing North and South as the Americas. On this Wednesday, April 9th, you're watching EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick, and thousands of pilgrims gather in St. Peter's Square today to see Pope Francis at his weekly audience.
Lo Spirito Santo sempre sta con noi, sempre è in noi, è nel nostro cuore.
The Pope's saying there that the Holy Spirit is always with us and in us. He announced today he's starting a series of lessons on the gifts of the Holy Spirit in his weekly audience. Francis cruised around the square in the Pope-mobile. One lucky man got to climb in and talk to the Holy Father. All sorts of people come to see the Pope for these audiences: school children, pilgrims, and tourists, and they packed the square again today. The Pope invited everyone to prepare well for Holy Week. And we're learning more about the Pope's schedule next week. The Vatican announcing that Pope Francis will celebrate the Holy Thursday Mass of the Lord's Supper at a Rome rehab center for the disabled and elderly. North and South Americans are gathered at Rome's Pontifical Urbaniana University. The U.S. Bishops' Conference is also represented. Alan Holdren is covering that conference for us. Alan, what are they talking about at this meeting?
Brian, more than half of the world's 1.1 billion Catholics are from North and South America combined. Now, this conference aims to show the opportunities and also the challenges they face. One interesting fact is that they're talking about the Americas, plural. This is terminology that Pope Francis uses to combine North and South America as a united continent. We caught up to one U.S. participant in these meetings, and she said that communications media is giving Catholics from North and South greater unity as they work in their daily lives.
The fact that we're now able to see each other and to be able to hear each other's stories, that we begin to realize that we have much more in common than what we thought separates us or what we think separates us. It's enabling us to, again, reach people that perhaps have been marginalized in the past or are, as Pope Francis says, were on the periphery, to bring them into the center of the conversation. It also means that we have to be more aware of the fact that these various populations, different groups of people are using social media more and more than perhaps what we thought.
They're talking about a lot of different issues, things like applying social teaching, a lot about solidarity. And there are many different contexts there in Latin America and North America, but there are also many shared issues. Think about things like migration, globalization, evangelization. Now, you can see also in these meetings that there is a real want for unity, and this is something that is Pope Francis inspired. This is an inspiration that they've taken, and they're trying to put it into practice for the Americas.
All right, thanks for that report from Rome tonight, Alan. And meanwhile, Pope Francis is gearing up for a trip to South Korea in August. Today, Korean Bishops' Conference unveiled the logo and the motto for that papal visit. Arise, shine, for your light has come. The glory of the Lord has dawned upon you is the motto. The blue and red flames represent the two Koreas, and the intertwining of those flames shows the desire for the reunification of the two nations. Pope Francis is going to Korea for the 6th Asian Youth Day and to beatify 124 Korean martyrs. According to the Vatican, Catholicism in Korea has grown by about 70% over the past decade. Catholics there number more than 5 million. That's about 10% of the national population. And we're seeing more graffiti in Rome celebrating Pope Francis. This is the latest street art near the Vatican. Pope Francis is depicted with goggles on the cover of Time magazine. In the corner are the words, "Art can swim." This seems to be a trend. Earlier this year, you might remember seeing the Super Pope graffiti. The Vatican even tweeted that picture out to thousands of followers. Pope Francis, inspiring art. Up next, as a young member of the Swiss Guard, Andreas Widmer personally witnessed the holiness of a saintly pope. His story tonight on Saints for Today. And heroin addiction is killing off an alarming number of the young middle class. We'll meet a 21-year-old trying to defy this deadly trend. On EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick, and Catholics from all over the world are planning a pilgrimage to Rome in a few weeks. They'll celebrate the canonizations of Popes John Paul II and John the 23rd. Continuing our Saints for Today series, Wyatt Spencer recently sat down with a former Swiss Guard under Blessed John Paul II. Wyatt, so you got the inside track on what it was like to work in the shadow of a saint.
Yes, Brian, it's interesting to hear about the Pope and being inside the Vatican from the perspective of a Swiss Guard. These men get to see the more subtle, intimate side of the Pope. And for one former Swiss Guard, getting to serve and talk with John Paul II has proven to be a blessing years down the line.
They're known as the Vatican's Special Security Force. Far from an outdated tradition, these men are trained to protect the Pope and the Vatican, plus to serve as honor guards for visiting heads of state.
You know, the funny thing is I went into the guards because it was military. Because, you know, to be a bodyguard was the coolest thing you can think of, no?
Andreas Wittmer at the Catholic University of America knows the job well. He served under John Paul II from 1986 to 1988. As a young man in his early 20s, Wittmer had lots of chances to guard the Pope, shake his hand, and even talk to him.
The way I met John Paul II is in a sense more like a gentleman who I worked for rather than the Pope. I'm supposed to be the person he passes by and you don't really pay attention to. But of course, John Paul isn't like that. He pays attention.
At first, Wittmer wasn't focused on his Catholic faith, but over time, through those short encounters, he says he saw an example of kindness.
He impressed me so much as a human person, and he actually reached out to me. It was a special occasion actually on a Christmas Eve where I was in really bad shape emotionally, and he noticed. And he reached out to me and thanked me for my service and showed me true compassion.
Nowadays, Wittmer is part of a group that regularly gets special access in the Vatican to help train new Swiss guards. But on the days leading up to the canonizations, he says he'll be a pilgrim like everyone else, to stand in appreciation of a former boss, a friend, and a saint.
Both John Paul II and John the 23rd will be canonized on Divine Mercy Sunday, April 27th. And Brian, you and several other members of our team will head to Rome that week for our coverage.
We are looking forward to it. Those were wonderful pictures. Thank you, Wyatt.
Absolutely.
Well, Toyota has recalled 6.5 million cars across the globe. It's because of a variety of problems spanning nearly 30 models, including the popular Corolla and Highlander models. Toyota is under pressure to announce recalls quickly after a U.S. government investigation found it hid information about past defects. The company said it is currently working on remedies for the problems. Dealers will replace the defective parts for free when new parts are available. Well, it's reaching pandemic proportions. Heroin addiction, robbing families of their loved ones just as their adult lives begin. A growing number of heroin addicts, young people from the suburbs, are dying before they reach their mid-20s.
A lot of my friends that I used to use heroin with are dead, you know, and they didn't even reach the age of 25.
21-year-old Cody Lewis hopes to be the exception. Clean now for about 6 months, he recognizes where his addiction took him.
I would lie and cheat and steal whatever I could from anyone, no matter how close you were to me. Heroin stole literally everything from me. My morals, my trust with my family.
Cody goes to group recovery meetings and speaks to church and school groups about his addiction, hoping to stay clean and sober. For his mom, the road to this point has been rough, but she says she will never give up.
I will be there for him as long as I can. And for any other mother, sibling, whatever, don't give up on them. You know, the person that you love is in there somewhere. They're just buried for a while.
Now, let us pray for those who are caught in that addiction trap. Pope Francis blesses a wooden cross today from the boats of migrants who have ended up on the tiny island of Lampedusa. He visited Lampedusa last August and denounced the globalization of indifference that greets migrants seeking a better life for themselves and their families. He celebrated Mass that day and spoke with some of the migrants. The plight of migrants trying to reach Europe has made headlines, with authorities rescuing about 4,000 people over the last few days. Izzy Santa joins us now in our studio. She's the Hispanic Media Director of Communications for the Republican National Committee. This is a different situation that we have here than they have in Italy, but let's talk about the Pope's concerns about balancing indifference to human beings with adhering to laws, immigration laws.
Well, I think one of the things that we have to recognize is that, we need to stop separating families. And we also need to recognize that our immigration system is broken, and we are seeing that in Congress, both Democrats and Republicans are working diligently to make sure that we're securing the border, that we have better interior enforcement, and we have legal immigration. And I think House Republicans have released their principles, and so we look forward to hearing what comes out of it.
It must be quite a challenge in your work with the Republican Party because, it seems like the Democrats have really had a hold of the Hispanic votes. How do the Republicans try to reach out to Hispanic voters and other minorities?
Over the past year, we have reshaped our campaign strategy, and as a result, we've hired grassroots people to work in the community, for their community, whether it be African American, Asian American, and the Hispanic community. And as such, we're going in and we're talking about our values. We're making sure that we are engaging early and often, because usually in the campaign world, you come 3 months prior to an election and you work really hard for the vote, but then you leave. And the community's nowhere to be seen afterwards, the Republican community. So what we're saying is we're housing this project at the Republican National Committee. It's going to be a year-round effort that's going to outlast any one campaign or candidate so that we can keep growing and making gains within different communities.
Would you say it's time for this? I mean, the Republicans haven't really been very effective reaching minorities, and you can't just do it at campaign time, can you?
That's why we have said over the course of last year that we need to be there early and often. But we've had successes. We've been involved in Governor Christie's campaign where, in coordination with the campaign, the New Jersey State Party, we were able to flip a county that was blue to red. First time ever in history. And he won 51% of the Latino vote. So I think we can replicate that success across the country.
How do you think strategy has to change, media strategy, when targeting a Hispanic audience?
Well, almost 62% of the Hispanic population are millennials. We're a very young community. So I think it's doing the traditional talk radio, but it also means being on the digital aspect, embracing and uniting our causes on Twitter, on Facebook, and making sure that we're being innovative to communicate our message, because we are a very young, talented population that's full of entrepreneurship, and they want to hear the Republican ideas.
Well, here in Washington, Izzy, we know that the Senate has received bipartisan support for an immigration reform bill, but in the House, Republicans have balked in taking that and trying to get that through. Do you think that must be frustrating for Hispanic voters?
I think, Hispanics are just as frustrated with Republicans as they are with Democrats. President Obama promised them in their first year, I will champion immigration reform, and he had a supermajority, controlled the House and the Senate and the White House, and he didn't do anything on immigration reform. But I think what we're seeing is now House Republicans have released a set of principles, and they want to work on this issue, and they want to get something done. I think the difference is that they don't like the Obamacare-like immigration bill of the Senate. And if you look at how Obamacare is polling, 47% of Latinos actually disapprove of the health care law. So I can't imagine that they would also like a big, massive, expansive bill when the House is presenting an approach that is a step-by-step approach.
So many of us are daughters and sons of immigrants. I know that I am, and almost everybody I know is here in America. How do we, as Americans, see Hispanic immigrants as our brothers and sisters?
Just like you said, we have to go there early and often and communicate our values. But I think one of the things that we need to improve upon is tone. Tone matters, and I think candidates and everybody across should be able to talk to one another just as Christians or as we would with our own loved ones, because everybody has a brother, has a sister, has a mom, has a dad.
All right, Izzy Santo, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Finally tonight, if you remember having pillow fights as kids at home, you're going to enjoy this mass public pillow fight. About 100 people armed with pillows joined in this big fight last weekend at the Hofburg Castle in Vienna. It was part of the World Pillow Fight Day. This international day was created online in 2008 as part of a social phenomenon known as flash mobbing. Feathers everywhere. Looks like a lot of fun. On that note, thanks for joining us tonight. Please like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. And you can catch us anytime again on EWTN's YouTube page. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Until tomorrow, good night and God bless.